Hi, and welcome back to Greek 1, taking a look at Jeremy Duff, Chapter 11, Special Verbs. First off is second aorists. There's a group of Greek verbs that do not form their aorist tense the same way as the other aorists. And the reason is they use a second stem. Their stem does not look like the first aorist stem. Also, their stem doesn't look like the present tense stem either. And that's the key to its identification. If the spelling of your verb stem has changed a lot from the present stem, it's probably a second aorist instead of a first aorist. All a first aorist needs to do is put sigma alpha after the stem, epsilon on the front, it's good to go. Second aorist does a lot of different things. It has the same meaning though. There's no interpretive difference. It's just a much older form of the verb that's being held onto in the language. From about the classical period, the first aorist became the main aorist and replaced a lot of older aorists. However, some very common verbs did not change. This is kind of like how in English we have ed for the past tense. However, we have some verbs that don't do it that way, like sang, for example, from sing. Nobody singed a song, they sang it, right? So we have those older verbs that we have held on to in the language. Well, second aorists are like that for Greek. Sometimes you will see a verb that can do both first and second aorist pattern. That's because they just never got rid of the second aorist for that verb. Most second aorists are you can make a short list of about 22 verbs and you'll cover most of the instances you'll ever run into. Some of our grammars do that list. I think ours does. The formation is various. There's a lot of different patterns for them, but most of those verbs are on page 125 and 6. If you memorize that short list, you'll recognize all your second aorists pretty quick. If you have a liquid letter, we talked about liquid letters in another lesson, l, m, n, y, and sometimes r. Those letters, they will sometimes drop out of a stem on their way to a second aorist, or if there's two, they'll be -1. It's just a weird little thing about it. Notice hamartano on the page 125. Hamartano is amartan for the root, but that n drops out and only hamart is kept for the root. It still gets an augment as long as it's indicative, but instead of taking our aorist endings we're used to, it takes what looks like an imperfect ending. That is one difference about the second aorist. It does not usually take the same endings as first aorist. Apothnesko, thnesk, is a very different spelling from the present tense. The thnesk goes from thnesk to thon, much shorter, to go to the aorist. Balo with 2 lambdas goes to ebalon with 1 lambda. Heurisco drops the sk and becomes just heron. Karalepo, lape becomes lip in the aorist. It loses a vowel quality. Lambano also drops the on just like hamartano did. Manthano, same thing. And also for lamban, lamb dropped the m, just became lab. The month dropped the n and became just math. You're going to see some reductions of nasals, reductions of nasals in front of a consonant. Most of these reductions are nasal letters. Some of them are reduction of vowels. If you have a long vowel in the present, most likely it'll be a short vowel in the aorist, on second aorists. All of these mean that you have a spelling change. If you look down there, I lead, ago, is a very different formation. It doubles. Present is ag, aorist is ag, plus the augment, agag, right? So you get that. Echo becomes escho. For some reason, it picked up a sigma. Pipt became pes. That's also very different. Erch became elf, and leg became ape. Those are not really changing from those present tenses. This is a case where the Greek language lost aorist tenses for verbs like erchomai and lego, and they had another verb that they lost the present tenses for. like aelthon and apon, and they just slid them together. Those would be depleted verb paradigm charts for those two verbs. But now they both are used as the tense for each other. They were not originally the same root. Esthio and esphagon, those are the same. It's two different roots that became, one was used for the present, the other for the aorist. It's interesting, though, our English word esophagus combines both of them into a noun. Horao and edon are really not the same at all. It's only that edon means he saw in the right context, and horao means he is seeing. So it seems like the one is the past for the other, but actually that aorist, edon, has a lot of other forms that get translated a different way because of what the word means. It means mental perception, not eye perception, like I see with my eyes. And you will see edon used in places where the eyes are not actually important. Like Jesus knew what they were about to do. He didn't see, he knew. So edon should be translated know or perceived in the mind rather than saw, although our English Bibles usually say saw. When he saw what they were about to do. But they don't mean seeing. They mean something else. Pay attention to those things. They're pretty fascinating. Pharaoh and eninkon, those two, not the same root either. But the second aorist is used for these that are just a root without other tense forms for them. All right. Augments can look funny sometimes on the front of these. Pay attention to the augment section. Some of them do a few weird things, and that's because some of them pre-existed augments. So augments was a later development in Greek history. Unusual endings on 11.1.6. Bino is pretty rare. By itself, it usually has kata or ana with it. That one seems to be missing some other material. It's just really, really short. The eta that is in the root often, when you have the eta of the ending, you can't tell the difference between them. They just slid together or something. So that can be confusing. One verb in particular, and maybe two, down in the bottom of that section, right before you get to the practice 11.1.6, notice apon with the alpha nu. That's an unusual spelling. Normally, apon, we'll find it again. I think it was at the bottom of 125, maybe? Yes, there it is normally omicron nu. 80% of the time, it'll have an omicron. And then 20% of the time, it's going to have an alpha. What this is somewhere in history, this verb became confused whether it was supposed to have a second or a first aorist vowel. So it appears with both. It doesn't mean this is trying to be a first aorist. It's just some of the confusing conventions of spelling on this verb. And apparently eilthate exists along with eilthete for aelthon as well. But only on that form, that particular person and number form. The rest of the forms will be normal. It's the third plural on the first one there, and it's the second plural on the next one. Just some odd forms. Now, these same verbs that are second aorist also do weird things in their future tense. There's a relatedness between them. If it is ephagon in the aorist, it will be phagomai in the future, which is not the same tense as the present. I suppose, in theory, we should be calling those second futures. It would be logical, but no grammar does it. But they are formed from the second aorist stem. That sounds weird that a future would be formed from an aorist, but that's actually where all futures came from. They got formed from their aorist tense. This is why the futures, if the aorist was second aorist, take a different odd form, a second future form. It's because of the derivation history. All right. On 11.2.1, they give you a bunch of liquid verbs. The key thing with the liquid verbs is the sigma. The sigma is not going to sit next to that liquid letter. It's going to drop out. What usually happens, and we don't show it here in our grammar, but we show a spelling reduction between the present and the future, but some of the verbs will be identical without the accents. And the accent will be earlier in the present, later in the future. The accent will be on the very last syllable in the future when it comes to those. Those will be the only differences. I'm looking for one. Okay. Yes. The fourth clump of verbs down on common liquid verbs, you see meno and crino. The future forms here are incorrect. Those should look exactly the same, meno and crino. But there's a circumflex accent over the future omegas and an acute accent over the epsilon or iota on the present. That's the real difference between them. I'm thinking there's a couple others that do that are not here. Monthano. It's all those new ending ones. That's the ones that do it. If you see a verb that ends in a new, chances are if you add a sigma to it, the sigma falls off. So you have a hard time telling the difference between present and future. If the only difference is the accent change, that's the thing that you use. Sometimes there's a vowel change, so the vowel changes are more helpful. Here we go, 11.2.2, it says accents in the future. Meno and crino use the same stem. The only difference between them is that the future uses the AO endings. However, once the contraction has happened, often the AO endings are no different than the normal O endings. They're always like that. This says often. They usually are like that, not just often. I've never seen them with the epsilon sitting there. So they're going to look alike without the accent. In the Greek New Testament, you will see accents. So accents on the present will be one before the end. Future will be on the end with that circumflex accent. That's what's key there. All right. We're going to stop there. The rest of our grammar book will wait until Greek 2. It's been a pleasure. Good luck on preparing for the final exam, and we'll catch you in the next class.